Imagine opening your morning newspaper in occupied Paris, 1943. The headlines scream that Allied forces have suffered a catastrophic defeat, thousands dead, strategic positions lost. The invasion everyone hoped for has been pushed back indefinitely. Your heart sinks. Liberation seems further away than ever. You close the paper, devastated. What you do not know is that every word you just read is a lie, a carefully crafted deception created by Allied intelligence. That newspaper is fake. The defeat never happened, and millions of people across occupied Europe are reading the exact same fabricated story at this very moment. But here is the truly remarkable part. This fake newspaper is not designed to fool you. It is designed to fool the Nazis who are watching you read it. Welcome to one of the most audacious propaganda operations of World War II, an operation so sophisticated that it created entirely fictional newspapers, complete with fake advertisements, sports scores, and weather reports. An operation that fooled not just individuals, but entire intelligence agencies. An operation that used deception within deception, where the lie itself was the message, and the real audience was never the one holding the paper. This is the story of how Allied intelligence fooled millions through propaganda that appeared to be propaganda, but was actually espionage. How fake news became real intelligence, and how the greatest trick was convincing the enemy they understood the game, while playing an entirely different one. Welcome to Cipher Tales, where we decode the hidden intersections of World War II propaganda and espionage. Today, we are revealing the extraordinary propaganda trick that fooled millions and changed the course of history. The deception begins now. Let us decode it. Act 1. The foundation. Understanding wartime deception. The nature of propaganda. Before we can understand the trick, we must understand the landscape. Propaganda during World War II was ubiquitous, sophisticated, and multifaceted. Every nation engaged in it. Every population was targeted by it, and everyone knew it existed. The word propaganda carries negative connotations today, but during World War II, it was simply a recognized tool of warfare. Governments openly acknowledged their propaganda ministries. Citizens understood that official communications were designed to boost morale, maintain support for the war effort, and present information in ways that served national interests. This universal awareness created an interesting dynamic. People consumed propaganda while simultaneously recognizing it as propaganda. They read government newspapers, knowing the information was filtered and shaped. They listened to radio broadcasts, understanding that the news was selective. They viewed posters and films, aware that the messages were crafted to influence their attitudes and behaviors. This sophisticated media literacy, this awareness that all wartime information was potentially manipulated, created both challenges and opportunities for intelligence services. Challenges because straightforward propaganda was often dismissed or discounted. Opportunities because sophisticated deception operations could exploit people's assumptions about how propaganda worked. The problem of credibility. By 1942 and 1943, Allied propaganda faced a credibility crisis in occupied Europe. Populations under Nazi control had been exposed to years of propaganda from both sides. German authorities flooded occupied territories with materials portraying the Reich as invincible and the Allies as weak and divided. Allied forces dropped leaflets and broadcast radio programs claiming the opposite. Occupied populations, desperate for accurate information about the war's progress and their prospects for liberation, had become skilled at reading between the lines. They looked for signals of authenticity. They compared multiple sources. They passed information through underground networks where it could be verified or challenged. Simply dropping leaflets claiming Allied victories was no longer sufficient. People had heard such claims before, only to see them contradicted by subsequent events. They needed information they could trust, but they also needed that information to reach them in ways that would not immediately mark them as resistance sympathizers if discovered by German authorities. Allied intelligence needed a propaganda method that would simultaneously reach mass audiences in occupied territories, provide information that could be independently verified as accurate, and create operational security for both the distributors and consumers of that information. The solution they developed was counterintuitive, audacious, and brilliantly effective. The concept: fake publications for real intelligence. Here was the core insight that drove the operation. What if Allied intelligence created completely fake newspapers that appeared to be authentic German or neutral publications, filled them with a mixture of real news and strategic deception, and distributed them in ways that made them appear to be genuine papers that had somehow made their way into occupied territories? These fake newspapers would look authentic. They would use the actual mastheads, layouts, and typefaces of real publications. They would contain genuine news items copied from real papers, mixed with fabricated stories serving Allied interests. They would include all the elements that made newspapers credible: advertisements, sports results, cultural columns, even weather reports. The brilliance of this approach operated on multiple levels. First, the newspapers would provide cover for readers. If discovered with a fake German newspaper, a French civilian could claim they had simply found it, or that it had been left behind by German soldiers. Unlike obvious Allied propaganda leaflets, which marked the possessor as potentially sympathetic to the resistance, these fake German newspapers appeared to be enemy materials. Second, the mixture of real and fake news made the fabricated content more believable. Readers could verify some stories against other sources or personal knowledge, and finding those stories accurate would increase their trust in the unverifiable stories, which were actually the strategic deceptions. Third, these fake publications could seed information that would spread through word of mouth. Someone reading a fake newspaper might share its contents with others, creating a ripple effect where the disinformation reached people who never saw the original publication. Fourth, and most remarkably, these fake newspapers could be used to communicate with resistance networks and Allied agents behind enemy lines. Specific stories, when phrased in particular ways or containing certain details, could carry coded intelligence while appearing to be ordinary news. This concept, simple in theory but extraordinarily complex in execution, became one of Allied intelligence's most successful propaganda operations. But making it work required solving numerous practical and operational challenges. Act 2. The production, creating the perfect fake. The organizations involved. Creating convincing fake newspapers required collaboration between multiple Allied organizations, each contributing specialized expertise. The British political warfare executive took the lead on this operation in Europe. The PWE had access to real German newspapers through neutral countries, allowing them to study layouts, writing styles, and content patterns. They employed German-speaking staff, including refugees and defectors, who understood the nuances of German journalism and culture. The American Office of Strategic Services contributed resources and distributed American-produced fake publications in territories where OSS had stronger operational presence.
The OSS brought printing capabilities, distribution networks through resistance contacts, and intelligence about German counterintelligence methods. Both organizations worked with resistance movements across occupied Europe. French, Belgian, Dutch, and Norwegian resistance groups provided feedback about what made publications appear authentic to local audiences and assisted with distribution. This international collaboration meant that fake newspapers could be tailored to specific regions and audiences. A fake Berlin newspaper aimed at German soldiers in France would differ in content and tone from a fake Paris newspaper aimed at French civilians, even though both served the same strategic objectives. The technical challenges. Creating fake newspapers that could fool trained intelligence officers and informed readers required meticulous attention to detail. Typography and layout. Every newspaper has distinctive visual characteristics. The specific fonts used for headlines and body text, the column widths and spacing, the placement of mastheads and section headers, the style of illustrations and photographs. Allied forgers had to replicate these elements precisely. This required obtaining original newspapers as references, analyzing their design specifications, and recreating them using available printing equipment. Sometimes this meant creating custom typefaces or modifying existing ones. It meant measuring column widths down to the millimeter and matching paper quality and color. Language and style. Each publication had distinctive writing conventions. The formal, bureaucratic tone of official German papers differed from the lighter style of entertainment magazines. Regional variations in language had to be respected. Cultural references had to be appropriate and current. Allied intelligence employed native German speakers as writers and editors. Many were refugees who had worked in journalism before fleeing Nazi persecution. They understood not just the language, but the cultural context, the subtle signals of authenticity that made writing ring true. Content accuracy. For the fake elements to be believable, the real elements had to be genuinely accurate. This meant monitoring actual German newspapers daily, tracking current events, and ensuring that verifiable information in the fake publications matched what readers could confirm through other sources. Intelligence analysts compiled daily summaries of news from German publications, radio broadcasts, and other sources. Writers creating fake newspapers would incorporate this genuine news alongside their fabricated stories, creating a blend that appeared entirely authentic. Physical production. The final publications had to look, feel, and even smell like real newspapers. This meant using appropriate paper stock, matching ink colors, replicating aging and wear patterns for publications that were supposedly several days old, and even adding realistic damage like water stains or creases that would naturally occur during distribution. Specialized printing facilities produced these materials under strict security. The same facilities sometimes printed genuine Allied propaganda alongside these fake publications, requiring careful operational security to prevent confusion and compromise. The content strategy. What went into these fake newspapers? The content mix was carefully calibrated to serve multiple purposes. Real news. Each fake publication contains substantial amounts of genuine news, copied from actual German newspapers or based on verified events. This might be 70 to 80% of the total content. This real news established credibility and gave readers verifiable reference points. Strategic disinformation. The remaining 20 to 30% consisted of fabricated stories designed to serve specific Allied objectives. These false stories were crafted to be plausible, consistent with the real news context, and strategically valuable. Examples of strategic disinformation included stories about German military setbacks that were exaggerated or entirely fictional, designed to demoralize German troops and occupied populations hoping for liberation. Reports of shortages, rationing problems, or industrial difficulties in Germany intended to create pessimism about the Reich's ability to sustain the war effort. Articles about dissent within Nazi leadership, suggesting internal conflicts and instability that might encourage resistance or defection. Announcements of policy changes or new regulations that were fabricated but plausible, sometimes designed to create confusion about actual German policies. False reports of Allied military movements or plans intended to mislead German intelligence officers who might intercept the fake newspapers. Coded messages. Some articles contained hidden communications intended for Allied agents or resistance networks. These might appear to be ordinary news stories, but would include specific phrases, dates, or details that carried operational significance for those who knew the codes. For example, a fake article about a concert scheduled for a specific date might actually be communicating that a supply drop or operation was planned for that date. A story mentioning a particular street address might be identifying a new safe house or dead drop location. Supporting content. To complete the illusion, fake newspapers included all the peripheral elements that made real newspapers feel authentic. Weather reports, sports scores, cultural listings, advertisements for products and services, even obituaries and personal notices. These elements required enormous research and creative effort, but were essential for the deception's success. The distribution challenge. Creating perfect fake newspapers meant nothing if they could not reach their intended audiences. Distribution was perhaps the operation's most dangerous aspect. Multiple distribution methods were employed. Airdrops. Allied aircraft dropping propaganda leaflets over occupied Europe would include fake newspapers in their payloads. These would be scattered across wide areas, landing in fields, streets, and public spaces where civilians or soldiers might find them. Sometimes they would hand them directly to trusted individuals. Resistance networks. Underground groups distributed fake newspapers through their existing channels. A resistance member might leave newspapers on train seats, in cafes, or in other public locations where they would be found and read. Sometimes they would hand them directly to trusted individuals. Infiltration into legitimate distribution.
In some cases, fake newspapers were inserted into the distribution chains of real publications. A resistance sympathizer working in a newspaper kiosk might slip fake copies in with genuine papers. A postal worker might include them in mail deliveries. Planted at German military facilities. Fake German military newspapers were sometimes left near German barracks, headquarters, or other facilities where soldiers would find and read them, assuming they were legitimate publications distributed through military channels. Each distribution method carried risks. Airdrops were relatively safe but imprecise, with no guarantee the materials would reach intended audiences. Hand distribution was more targeted but exposed resistance members to capture if discovered. Infiltration into legitimate distribution was most effective but required access and cooperation that was not always available. Act 3. The deception layers. Tricks within tricks. Level 1. The obvious deception. The first layer of the operation was straightforward.
fake newspapers containing disinformation designed to demoralize enemy forces and encourage occupied populations. This was the surface level that most people understood if they recognized the publications were Allied creations. German intelligence officers who intercepted these fake newspapers might analyze them, identify the fabricated stories, and dismiss them as clumsy Allied propaganda. They might even use the fake publications as examples in training, teaching their analysts how to recognize forged materials. This was expected. Allied intelligence knew that sophisticated German counterintelligence would eventually identify at least some fake publications. The question was not whether they would be discovered, but how long they would remain undetected and what could be accomplished before discovery. Level 2. The intelligence harvest. The second layer was more subtle. Even when German intelligence identified fake newspapers, their analysis of those publications provided intelligence to the Allies. How? Through double agents and compromised communication channels. German intelligence reports analyzing fake Allied newspapers were sometimes intercepted through signals intelligence. These reports revealed what German analysts found credible, what they dismissed, and what methods they used to identify forgeries. This information helped Allied intelligence refine their forgery techniques and understand German counterintelligence capabilities. Additionally, German responses to disinformation in fake newspapers sometimes revealed real information. If a fake story claimed German troops were massing in a particular location and German intelligence specifically denied this in their communications, that denial confirmed the troops were not actually there, providing the Allies with negative intelligence that was still valuable for planning. Level 3. The double bluff. The third layer was brilliantly devious. Some fake newspapers were deliberately created to be identified as fakes, but they contained disinformation that seemed to be the opposite of what the Allies actually wanted the Germans to believe. Here is how this worked. Allied intelligence would create a fake German newspaper containing a false story that seemed to benefit the Allies. For example, a story claiming that German defenses in a particular area were strong and well supplied. German intelligence would intercept this fake newspaper, identify it as Allied propaganda, and conclude that the Allies were trying to discourage attack in that area through exaggeration. Therefore, German analysts might reason the defenses must actually be weak. But this conclusion was exactly what the Allies wanted. The defenses were actually strong, and by making the Germans believe they were weak through reverse psychology, the Allies encouraged attacks that would fail, wasting German resources and morale. This triple-think deception, where the apparent lie was actually the truth, presented as a lie so it would be disbelieved and lead to the wrong conclusion, represented the height of psychological warfare sophistication. Level 4. The resistance communication network. The fourth layer involved using fake newspapers as a communication channel with resistance groups and Allied agents. Specific stories in fake newspapers could contain coded information only meaningful to those who knew the cipher. A fake article about a factory fire might actually be communicating that a sabotage operation succeeded. A false report about a train schedule might be providing coordinates for a supply drop. Because these messages appeared in what looked like German newspapers, they provided operational security. If a resistance member was searched by German authorities and found carrying a fake German newspaper, it appeared less suspicious than carrying Allied propaganda or coded notes. Furthermore, these coded messages could reach multiple recipients simultaneously. A single fake newspaper distributed to dozens of resistance cells could communicate the same information to all of them, ensuring coordination without requiring risky personal contacts or radio transmissions. Level 5. The ultimate misdirection. The fifth and most sophisticated layer was using the entire fake newspaper operation as a distraction from other intelligence activities. By creating a visible, eventually discoverable deception operation, Allied intelligence drew German counterintelligence attention and resources toward analyzing and countering fake newspapers. This focus provided cover for other more sensitive operations. While German analysts dedicated time to identifying forged publications, dissecting their content, and tracking their distribution, they had less capacity to focus on actual espionage networks, communication intercepts, or military intelligence gathering. The fake newspaper operation was real and valuable, but it also served as a decoy, protecting even more important secrets. This meant that even its compromise served Allied interests by validating German counterintelligence methods and making them more confident in their ability to detect Allied deception, when in fact they were only detecting the deception they were meant to discover.
Act 4. The impact, measuring success. Quantifying the results. How effective were fake newspaper operations? Measuring propaganda impact is notoriously difficult, but multiple indicators suggest these operations achieved significant success. Distribution numbers. Declassified records indicate that Allied forces produced and distributed millions of fake newspaper copies across occupied Europe between 1942 and 1945. Some individual publications had print runs in the hundreds of thousands. German reactions. German counterintelligence reports, intercepted through signals intelligence, documented their awareness of and concern about fake Allied publications. The resources they devoted to countering these operations indicated they viewed them as significant threats. Prisoner testimony. Interrogations of German prisoners revealed that many had read fake newspapers and believed at least some of the content. Some cited false information from fake publications when explaining their decision to surrender or their assessment of Germany's war prospects. Resistance feedback. Reports from resistance networks confirmed that fake newspapers reached occupied populations and influenced morale. Some groups specifically requested continued supply of certain publications because they proved effective propaganda tools. Strategic outcomes. Several military operations benefited from disinformation spread through fake newspapers. Enemy forces sometimes deployed based on false information, making them vulnerable to Allied attacks. Case study: Operation Fortitude's paper trail. One notable success involved fake newspapers supporting Operation Fortitude, the massive deception operation designed to conceal the Normandy invasion location and timing. In the months before D-Day, fake newspapers circulated in occupied France containing stories that subtly reinforced the false narrative that the invasion would target Pas-de-Calais rather than Normandy. These stories mentioned military movements near Calais, described Allied interest in that region's ports, and referenced strategic assessments favoring northern invasion routes. German intelligence intercepted these fake newspapers and analyzed them. Some correctly identified them as Allied forgeries. However, the cumulative effect of multiple sources, including fake newspapers alongside double agent reports and fake radio traffic, all pointing toward Pas-de-Calais, convinced German planners that this was indeed the probable invasion site. When the actual invasion occurred at Normandy, German reserves remained stationed near Calais for crucial hours and days because Hitler and his commanders believed Normandy was a diversion and the main attack would still come at Calais. Fake newspapers contributed to this strategic deception, which was critical to Allied success on D-Day. Unintended consequences. Not all outcomes were intended or positive. Fake newspapers sometimes had unintended effects on occupied populations. In some cases, false information about Allied advances created premature optimism, leading civilians to take resistance actions before liberation actually occurred. These premature uprisings sometimes resulted in brutal German reprisals and civilian casualties. False stories about German policies or regulations occasionally created real confusion that complicated daily life for people in occupied territories who could not always distinguish between genuine German announcements and fake ones.
Some fake newspapers contained disinformation so effective that it spread beyond intended audiences and was believed by Allied personnel who encountered it through intelligence channels. This sometimes created operational confusion until the misinformation could be traced back to Allied sources and corrected. These unintended consequences highlighted the challenges of propaganda operations where control over information flow was inherently limited. Once fake newspapers entered circulation, their content took on a life of its own, spreading through networks and being interpreted in ways creators could not fully anticipate or control. The evolution of techniques. As the war progressed, fake newspaper operations became increasingly sophisticated. Early efforts were relatively crude, with obvious fabrications and limited distribution. Later operations involved perfect forgeries, subtle disinformation, and coordinated distribution through multiple channels. Allied intelligence learned from German responses and adapted their methods accordingly. When German analysts developed techniques for identifying certain types of forgeries, Allied forgers refined their craft to defeat those detection methods. This competitive adaptation drove continuous innovation in both deception and counter-deception. By 1944, some fake newspapers were so convincing that even Allied personnel could not reliably distinguish them from genuine publications without detailed forensic analysis. This level of sophistication represented the culmination of 3 years of operational experience and technical refinement. Act 5. The Legacy: From Paper to Pixels. Post-war assessment. After the war ended, intelligence services conducted assessments of propaganda operations' effectiveness. Fake newspaper programs received favorable evaluations, though with recognition of their limitations and risks. The programs demonstrated that sophisticated deception could achieve strategic effects at relatively low cost. Producing millions of fake newspapers required fewer resources than major military operations, but contributed to those operations' success. They validated the integration of propaganda with intelligence operations, showing that public information campaigns could serve covert intelligence purposes simultaneously. They proved that audiences could be fooled by sufficiently sophisticated forgeries even when generally aware that propaganda and deception were prevalent. However, assessments also noted that effectiveness depended on operational security, distribution capabilities, and the broader strategic context. Fake newspapers worked best when supporting other intelligence activities rather than operating in isolation. Cold War evolution. The techniques pioneered in World War II fake newspaper operations evolved during the Cold War. Both Western and Soviet intelligence services produced forged publications as part of their information warfare efforts. The CIA created fake magazines and newspapers distributed in communist countries. The KGB produced forged documents, letters, and publications designed to discredit Western governments and sow discord among NATO allies. These Cold War operations benefited from World War II lessons. Forgers understood the importance of physical authenticity, content credibility, and strategic targeting. They knew that the best forgeries mixed truth with lies, that distribution was as important as creation, and that deception worked best when layered with other intelligence activities. Modern information warfare. Today's information warfare uses digital media rather than print, but the fundamental principles remain remarkably similar. Modern disinformation operations create fake websites that mimic legitimate news sources. They produce fabricated social media accounts that appear to be real individuals or organizations. They generate content that mixes truth with strategic lies to make the false elements more believable. Distribution now occurs through digital networks rather than physical paper, but the challenges are analogous. How do you ensure target audiences see your content? How do you make it appear authentic? How do you prevent early detection by adversary counterintelligence? The layered deception strategies developed for World War II fake newspapers appear in modern operations. Disinformation that is deliberately discoverable to distract from more sophisticated efforts. Messages hidden in seemingly innocuous content. Competitive adaptation as attackers and defenders continuously evolve their techniques. One significant difference is scale. Digital distribution allows disinformation to reach millions instantaneously, far exceeding the reach of physical newspapers. But this also means detection and debunking can occur just as quickly, creating dynamics that favor rapid iteration and adaptation.
The ethical dimension. Fake newspapers raise ethical questions that remain relevant today. Was it justified to deceive not just enemy forces, but occupied civilians who desperately needed accurate information? Did the strategic benefits outweigh the risks of creating confusion and false hope that sometimes led to tragedy? These questions lack simple answers. The fake newspaper operations occurred in the context of total war against genocidal regimes, providing strong moral justification for aggressive information warfare. Yet the techniques involved systematic deception of vulnerable populations, raising concerns about means and ends. Modern information warfare inherits these ethical dilemmas. When is strategic deception justified? What obligations do states have toward accuracy and truth in public communications? How should the potential for unintended harm be weighed against strategic advantages? Intelligence services and military forces continue grappling with these questions, as do scholars, policymakers, and the public. The World War II fake newspaper operations provide historical context, but not definitive answers to dilemmas that remain contentious 8 decades later. Conclusion. The truth about the trick. Decoding the full operation. So we return to our opening scene. A reader in occupied Paris holding a newspaper filled with lies designed to fool millions. Now we understand what was truly happening. That fake newspaper was the product of sophisticated intelligence operations combining technical forgery, psychological manipulation, strategic deception, and operational risk. It served multiple purposes simultaneously: demoralizing enemy forces, communicating with resistance networks, gathering intelligence through German responses, and providing cover for other operations. The trick was not simply creating a fake newspaper. Forgery alone would have limited value. The trick was embedding that fake newspaper in a comprehensive deception operation with multiple layers, where discovery of one layer protected deeper secrets, and where the enemy's awareness of the deception was itself part of the plan. Millions were indeed fooled, but fooled is perhaps too simple. Some readers believed everything they read. Others recognized the materials as propaganda, but still absorbed specific messages. German intelligence officers identified fake newspapers, yet drew conclusions that still served Allied interests. Even those who understood they were seeing Allied deception might not grasp the full complexity of how that deception operated. At Cipher Tales, we decode these forgotten operations, where propaganda and espionage merged into something greater than either alone. The fake newspaper operations exemplify this integration perfectly. They appeared to be straightforward propaganda, distribute false information to influence attitudes and behaviors. But they were actually sophisticated intelligence operations using propaganda as both tool and cover for espionage activities. The papers themselves were physical artifacts, millions of copies distributed across a continent. Most were read and discarded, leaving no trace. A few survive in archives, physical evidence of an operation that existed in the shadows between truth and lies, between public information and secret intelligence.
The techniques pioneered in these operations echo through modern information warfare. Every time we encounter potential disinformation online, we face similar questions. Is this information authentic? Who created it and why? Is the obvious message the real message? What other purposes might this serve? Understanding World War II fake newspaper operations provides perspective on current information challenges. The methods change, print to digital, but the psychological principles remain constant. In our next upload on Cipher Tales, we are decoding the secret radio station that changed D-Day. You will discover how Allied intelligence operated a clandestine broadcast network that fooled German listeners while coordinating resistance operations. If this deep dive into the World War II propaganda trick that fooled millions fascinated you, please subscribe to Cipher Tales for more decoded mysteries from the hidden history of World War II. Hit the notification bell so you never miss our next upload. Like this video if you found it revealing and thought-provoking. Every like helps us reach more people who appreciate the complex, hidden dimensions of history. Comment below and tell us, were you surprised by how sophisticated World War II fake newspaper operations were? Do you see parallels with modern disinformation? What other World War II propaganda and espionage intersections should we decode next? Share this video with anyone fascinated by psychological warfare, information operations, or the hidden history of how intelligence services shape perception and reality. Until then, remember, the most effective deceptions are those where even the discovery of the trick serves the deceiver's purposes. This has been Cipher Tales. Keep questioning, keep decoding, keep discovering the secrets that changed history.